Welcome back to Book Infested, a book review podcast and literary podcast. My name is Salem, and I'm going to be your host today. So the book we're talking about this week is Toy Soldiers of Monsters and Men, Volume 1 by D.D Ward. And I do want to put it out there that I initially found this book because the author reached out to me and asked for a review. So this podcast episode is effectively me doing that review for the author. I would like to point out that the author did offer me a free copy. However, I purchased this copy myself, and that's personal preference. Anytime I do a review of a book, especially if someone has asked me to do it, I do purchase a copy. I used to accept free copies. I no longer do. So I just wanted to be very transparent about that this was requested of me to read this book. And let me tell you, I really wanted to like this book. I really, really did. It's got monsters. It has political intrigue. It has interpersonal issues. It's Suicide Squad meets Attack on Titan meets science, magic, messes. It has a lot of things that I already like in fiction, and on top of that, it's supposed to be like a sci-fi horror. Now, I don't normally dip into the sci-fi side of horror. I tend to lean into like action sci-fi, kind of campy sci-fi. I grew up on Star Wars and Star Trek, so that's kind of my sci-fi world. But that's kind of my sci-fi background. But I do like good horror sci-fi. So like I'm a big fan of the original Alien movie and that sort of thing. This had all of the bones of what I wanted in a book like that. It did not follow through. I really want to support independent authors. As somebody who is a published poet and is, shopping around my own works, I really believe in supporting independent authors, even if they're not going through a publishing house. I believe in supporting small publishing houses. So the fact that this was supposed to be something that could really fit into a lot of niches that I liked, and was also a self-published author, I wanted to be able to really sing the praises of this book. I can't. I can't do that. I don't want to speak poorly of the author, but he did really shoot himself in the foot, with me at least. When I'm reading the intro to this book, and I have the book right in front of me, so I apologize. In the preface, he literally opens by saying he's always been drawn to well-developed concepts and thoroughly fleshed out ideas, to beautiful storytelling. And he spends essentially 2 pages talking about how he thinks that this is the best book ever, more or less. To quote page 1 of the preface, "I honestly believe that something significant and meaningful, and maybe profound, but the jury's still out on that one, germinated within my own mind, an organic growth that was as much an intellectual process as it was an instinctive one." So the author really set up this book as being something incredible and profound and having something big to say. If you can't live up to that hype, don't say it. And the author severely failed to live up to the hype. I was talking with my dad, who is also a published author. He's published a handful of books now, and is working on another one. But he had brought up something to me once, when he had looked at another author's work, and the other author had asked my father to just read through and give some, broad thoughts on a piece of writing. And when my father returned it to him, my father said, well, you're writing on excellence, but you have several key errors in this book, proofreading, editing errors. If you're going to write about excellence, then you should take the time and effort to make what you're writing excellent. And that's kind of how I felt about this book. If you are going to essentially, if you are going to talk yourself up so much to say that this is a story worth telling and that you're trying to say something profound, then you should, in fact, make the story worth reading and say something profound. I did not find anything in this book that I thought was profound enough to warrant that lauded of an introduction, to say, to put it bluntly. A brief synopsis is essentially, it's an alternate history of the 1980s during the Cold War, except instead of nuclear missiles, they made people. They were trying to create a virus that essentially would make superhumans. And in the process, they implanted this superhuman virus into embryos, and 10 embryos survived and became 20-plus foot tall titans, is what they're called. And the titans are incredibly interesting. I will give the author that. There are parts of this book that are good. There are parts of this book that are interesting. I'm not going to sit here and say that none of it was good. There are a couple of fight scenes that I've really liked, and a couple of characters, particularly little flashes that we see of titans, that I really love. But I also just like monsters in general. I like when the monsters are made human or the humans are made monsters. And the fact that these entities were born out of the idea of them being the next evolutionary phase of humanity, which is very much an overdone trope in sci-fi, but I still like it when it's done well. That was very interesting to me. And I do like the introduction of some of them. However, that being said, there are so many characters in this book, and I couldn't bring myself to care about any of them. You do spend a significant amount of time with Tobias and Grace and one or two others. Seth is one that you meet later on that you spend a little more time with, but they're so flat and they're so ill-characterized that I found it very hard to connect with any of them. And I like connecting with characters. I want an author to show me a character, and even if I have nothing in common with them, I want them to show me a character and make me see their point of view. I was actually recording some content with a friend of mine named Pigeon about the book Exquisite Corpse by Poppy Z. Bright. That book is visceral and disgusting, and every single character in that book is not one that I personally can see eye to eye with on everything, or that I personally would even want to be near. But the author does an excellent job of making me see things from those characters' point of view. Another book was Seventh Mansion by Maurice Meyer, which is a book told entirely in poetic prose. And that is another one where I ended the book, and I ended that book, and while I deeply disagreed with the main character and found his headspace a very disturbing one to be in, I could, because of the way that the author had written it, I could see things from the main character's point of view. I could understand how he got to his thought process, or I could understand his actions and his ideals following his thought process, even if I couldn't connect with him in like a very personal way. With this book, I couldn't connect with any of the characters. I also found many of the explanations had huge holes of logic in them. Now, I'm one for suspension of disbelief. I'm the person who likes the thought-provoking psychological horror as much as anyone. But I also like the dumb action flick. You know, I'm the person who, I like Expendables on the same level that I like The Godfather. I liked Clown in a Cornfield, and I also like, The Shining. I can do both. This book feels like it was trying to be of the same caliber of a Godfather or The Shining, but was written in a way that it came out more like Clown in a Cornfield. And I'm okay with something being a kind of brainless sci-fi action-y thing, but then don't try and sell it as this incredibly profound story. There are points when the author uses an extensive vocabulary and these really, sweeping metaphors. The only problem is, a lot of times the metaphors don't make sense. There's something in one, and I'm failing to remember the exact phrase, but it says something about like, she bit down on her teeth. You're not biting down on your teeth. I'm failing to remember an exact one, but there was one that when I read it, I quite literally took a picture of it and sent it to my editor. And I was like, what even does this mean? And they responded with a big old question mark. Because it was just so, it felt like the author was trying to make up for a lack of having something profound to say with a lot of really flowery language. And there are times, the author clearly has an extensive vocabulary. Unfortunately, I think he has an extensive vocabulary that isn't always backed by the appropriate definitions. There are times when he uses the word bemused in ways that genuinely do not make sense to use them in that fashion, and it makes me wonder if the author knows what the word bemused actually means. And please understand, I'm not saying this as an insult. I'm saying it as it's a symptom of an underlying issue throughout the book as well. There are multiple points in the book where the author says something or explains something, but the way that he explains it is either a gross oversimplification or is just patently false. He brings up the concept of the two wolves theory, which again is... I personally take some issue with bringing up the idea of the two wolves, and again, I understand some people can do it, and this may be just a personal issue that I have, but the two wolves thing has been so memified, to use that term, in modern popular culture that to use it at all kind of cheapens the effect of it at this point, I think. But additionally, he grossly oversimplifies it as saying oh, inside of you there are two wolves, one of them good, one of them bad. And it's like, that's pretty intense oversimplification of what the two wolves metaphor is supposed to be. Additionally, later he brings up there's a character that can create like an electric shock with his hands. It's described as being something akin to what an electric eel can do, but he can create a shock up to 30,000 volts. And it's explained as this big terrifying thing that a lot of people can die just with, as few as 50 volts and all this kind of stuff. The standard police taser releases a charge of 50,000 volts. So if the most that this character can do is 20,000 volts less than what a standard police taser can do, it's not going to have the huge effect that the author describes it having in the book. And it's like a turning point in a big battle when this character shocks someone with this 30,000 volt shock. Now, I'm not going to pretend that 30,000 volts isn't going to hurt like heck, but it's not going to be able to take down somebody with massive regeneration abilities, no matter how much those regeneration abilities have been turned down. If a normal human person under no influence of substances could take that and walk it off, a superhuman most certainly would be able to take it and walk it off. And I know people personally who have been in security jobs who have been tased, and they say, yes, it sucks, but you can walk it off. And there are videos that I've seen of people who are under the influence of substances who they get shot with a taser multiple times and they don't even blink at it. So that scene is towards the end of the book, but that was definitely one of the last nails in the coffin for me with this book in general, because if you're going to take the time to go out of your way to explain the voltage and explain, and when I say explain, I do mean explain. The author spends, I believe it's 1 to 2 paragraphs talking about voltage and what the human body can withstand, and voltages that people have died at, and then you're gonna just make up a random number because it sounds cool. You're destroying the suspension of disbelief. I was speaking with my brother, and he quoted someone else, so I apologize. This is, not even secondhand, this is thirdhand now. But he quoted someone else who said, you don't have to know everything, but you should know enough to make it believable. If you're going to write about military tactics, you don't have to know everything about military tactics, but you should know enough about it to make it feel believable. I'm not saying you have to know everything about, the science of electricity and taser voltages to the nth degree, but you should know a simple Google search. It literally took me 10 seconds to do a simple Google search to verify that a police taser has 20,000 volts more than what this superhuman supposedly was incapacitated by. There is another point where, and I think this is an underlying issue as well, the author continuously he gives characters Japanese names and then refers to them as Chinese, or he refers to people by a specific nationality and then says that they're speaking in their own tongue, takes the time to specify that they're speaking in their own tongue. I don't want to make judgment calls one way or the other, but I will say, if you say someone is a nationality and they are in a specific country of their nationality, you don't need to say that they're speaking in their own tongue. It feels, I don't know how to explain it, other than to say, it feels a little like I'm being talked down to as the reader. Additionally, the issue with giving characters Japanese names and then calling them Chinese, the author states that he likes some animes. Anyone with a cursory history with anime should know you don't call a Japanese person Chinese or vice versa. The fact that he names one of his characters Junji Ito, which anyone who walks in the horror circles is going to at least know who Junji Ito is. He names a character Junji Ito, and then multiple times refers to him as Chinese, is blatantly insulting, and I'm not even Japanese or Chinese. So, again, it's one of those things where I am insulted by the fact that the author didn't take 10 seconds to open a search engine on his phone to research this. I genuinely feel insulted that that the author would not think that I would notice that. Additionally, this is a very weird topic to talk about with this book. And it's such a random throwaway thought, but I noticed it part of the way through the book, and I couldn't stop noticing it once I noticed it. Every character that is going to be a character of importance in his little hero squad, is described as being incredibly hot. And it is so weird to point that out as a detail, but he goes out of his way to describe that this 70-year-old man is still very fit for his age, and describe how one of the characters is, 6'10" and built like a brick shithouse. And he spends 2 pages talking about this character who is bathing in a pond or a river. I don't remember. But he's bathing outside in this body of water. And then at the end of those 2 pages, he spends roughly 2 paragraphs describing that this character is tall and chiseled and extremely muscular. And there were multiple points in this book where I would underline a description and go, cool, so I know they're going to show up later because you described them as hot. And this isn't just reserved for males. It's he also does it with females. One of the main female characters, Grace, is described by a character that we later find out is her uncle as her body being difficult to contain by her clothes. First of all, having the point of view of her uncle saying that about her is interesting, and it's not the kind of book where that sort of thing comes up. So I don't know why that description was there the way it was. And here's the thing. I've read Faulkner. I read Exquisite Corpse. I've read other books where that element of storytelling is there, where you have these you have members of the same family who are looking at each other with lust. I've read books like that. If there's a place for it in the story, if it can be justified by the story, I'm not going to argue with it being there. What I will say is that it felt very strange that sort of a description would be used by an uncle towards his niece and then never brought up again. So I think it was just one of those editing oversights on the part of the author. But additionally, there's a female Titan who shows up. And the first time she shows up, she's crawling out of the water onto a British naval vessel. Who, by the way, the main captain of the British naval vessel is nicknamed Big Ben. This book feels like a joke. But this female titan comes up out of the water, climbs up onto the deck, and the first thought that a bunch of soldiers have, British naval soldiers, about this inhuman, gray-skinned monstrosity attacking their ship is not, oh shit, or, man the guns, or even no thoughts, just action. The first thought that apparently every single person on the ship has is, she has huge breasts. Again, this book feels like a joke. And a little bit of an insult that I'm supposed to think that this is supposed to be some profound piece of literature, when throughout the entire book there is not a single thing about it that makes me think that it should be considered profound. Again, I wanted to like this book. I really, really did. I wanted to be able to read this and promote the author and, have this be another one of those rare self-publishing stories that then becomes a big hit, especially considering it's the first in a series. I can't, in good conscience, say that. There are so many errors on top of just what I've already talked about. There are simple punctuation errors that if this author had an editor or even a beta reader, they would have caught it, which makes me believe that this author quite literally wrote it down, maybe did a second draft, and then threw it at the publisher. It does not feel like a finished, polished manuscript. It feels like I said, a first, maybe a second draft of a story, just from all of the errors. And again, I understand self-publishing, there are gonna be more errors than a book that goes through a publishing house by simple virtue of the author is doing everything himself. I understand that. But I've also read self-published books that are extremely well written and well edited and have been worth my time and money. I don't think the author... I'm going to say this and it's going to sound really mean, but considering the whole episode that I've been recording, this feels like a book where the author is so arrogant at his own idea that he thinks we should just accept his slop. That's the feeling that I got from this book. Because if he can't be bothered to write... he thinks that the story is worth telling, but he can't be bothered to put it into a format that is worth reading. He cannot be bothered to use proper punctuation. He makes bizarre choices in his stylistic layout and his italices and all of that. And on top of that, the number of times that he puts the word almost in this book. So I use sticky flags, and I'm just gonna, so you can hear that. I use the little sticky note flags in my books when I come across something that's interesting, and really early on in the book I noticed that the word almost was used a lot. So every time I found the word almost on a page, I would underline it and put a sticky flag on there. And sometimes it would be used 2 to 3 times on a single page, and there was a section where it was being used at least once on every page for multiple pages. When I tell you, I bought a pack of the sticky flags, and I had to buy another pack because I didn't run out of just the one color I was using to note when that word was used. But I ran out of 3 different colors of the flags, and so I had to buy another pack in order to keep up with all the pages where the word almost is used. Now, that might seem kind of excessive, but once you notice it, you can't not notice it. And literally just having someone else read the story who has any kind of critical reading ability could notice that and tell you. And then you take that criticism, you fold it into the story, and you make it better. That's the thing, is any good criticism is going to make a book better. And to so blatantly publish something that is so full of errors feels a little like the author thinks he is above criticism. And again, I understand there are going to be typos. There are going to be small errors in self-publishing books. I am okay with things every once in a while. I get it. But the fact that I don't think I went more than 3 pages without the word almost being said, or kind of, or nearly, and then there just being consistent misuse of punctuation and grammar and consistent misuse of words, it detracted so much from the telling of the story that I could not enjoy the story anymore. And I wish I had better things to say about it. But the bad so outweighed and overshadowed everything else about the story that even the good parts didn't feel as good. Because the good parts showed that the author is capable. He's capable of writing good fiction. And that's the thing that I think sucks the most is, again, the author is capable of writing good parts. There are good pieces within this book, but it is so bogged down by everything around it. When you're mining for precious gems, you don't keep the rubble. You keep the precious gems. I think the author would do himself a great service if he paid the money for a good editor to go through and clear out the rubble. And then this book might be worth reading. That's my opinion. If you do want to read the book for yourself, which, hey, if you're one of those people that hears a bad review and you go, okay, I have to see if I'm on the same page. D.D. Ward's book is, again, called Toy Soldiers of Monsters and Men. And it is D.D. Ward, like the letter, not a name D-E-E or anything like that. It is the initial D, Ward, W-A-R-D. And I bought this off of Amazon. I can double check and see if he has other places you can buy it. But I believe that this is self-published through Amazon, so I think that might be the only place you can buy it. If you have suggestions for other books, please feel free to reach out to me. If you are an author who wants me to review your book, I am accepting submissions, or requests, I should say, for that. Just simply reach out to me on Instagram, or you can reach out to my email, salemsstudy@gmail.com. I'm also on Blue Sky if you want to reach out to me there. Again, all of my social media is going to be Salem's Study. So Instagram, Blue Sky, email, all of that. You can reach out to me. I'd be happy to hear from you. If you've read this book and you think I'm wrong, tell me about it. Message me or put it on one of my social medias. I am open to a conversation about it. because this book is well reviewed on Goodreads, though God knows why. I think that's where I'm going to end it, because I have spent far too long letting this book eat up my brain space. But to the author, I know that I have been extremely critical of this book, and that I have spoken extremely poorly of it for something close to 30 or 40 minutes now. Understand that criticism is constructive criticism is intended to make you better. And if you ask for a review from someone and they give you their honest opinion, take it into consideration. You clearly have people who have read your book. You clearly have people who like it. I do think you could cast a wider net if you just took the time to really go through and hone it. But as it stands, I cannot promote this book for myself. I cannot recommend it. So take my opinion with a grain of salt. Obviously, my opinion is just my opinion. But I hope that you all have a good day, night, week, month, whatever time it is by you. I wish you all the best. Bye-bye.